Welcome to Mental Health Dumpster Fire. My name is Courtney Laver, licensed clinical social worker.
And I am Jess Miller, art therapist.
We are therapists and we have opinions. That's it. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Mental Health Dumpster Fire. I am on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Laver Listens.
And I am on Instagram and Facebook as The Artsy Brain.
And our disclaimer is that this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. It is not a replacement for therapy. We cannot give you specific advice or clinical services via this podcast or our social media. And today we have a guest. Woo! Our very first podcast guest is Courtney Morgan. Woo! Please introduce yourself to the audience.
Yes. So I am Courtney Morgan. I'm a licensed professional clinical counselor and the founder of a small practice called Counseling Unconditionally. And like you guys, I am on Instagram and Facebook as Counseling Unconditionally, where I share a bit more about me and my theoretical approaches, but also the approaches of my small team.
Yeah.
And we're so happy you're here.
I'm so happy you're here.
Yay! Friend of the podcast.
Yes. Another therapist with opinions.
I do have opinions.
Yes. That'll be great. Cool.
Right. Well, we are very happy you're here. We're very happy to have a guest, our very first guest. So we'll just kind of see how this goes. What are your... why are you a therapist? Why do you do what you do?
We're gonna interview you.
Yeah. So I initially was interested in therapy because I'm very curious about why people do what they do. Mm-hmm. I've always found that to be super interesting. Unfortunately, like the further I get into this field, or I guess pretty quickly, I realized that there's so many factors that like why people do what they do. There's so many individual factors there, and there's not a one size fits all answer, but that was initially why I got into it. Was I was just super curious, and I find like you're able to connect with people so deeply and learn so much about a person. Mm-hmm. So initially it was really just my curiosity that got me into the field. I know everyone's like, I like to help people, and I'm like, oh, I'm nosy. I want to know. I want to know, and like I'll help you, of course, but like I need to know what's going on.
I like that you're like, I'm nosy, but we're going to call it curiosity.
Yeah, just super curious. Super curious.
That, though.
Yeah.
I'm pretty nosy too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's part of like why people continue to be therapists is because you get all the drama.
Yeah. You get all the drama, and you just like really start to understand a person, and like you can understand why they do things probably before they can even realize it. And then the beautiful thing about that is like we can decide, how is this working for us? Is this working for us?
Yeah.
Is this not working for us? And if not, what can we do about it? And the first step, I think, is always creating that awareness. So in order to create the awareness, I need to know myself, right? So it comes from a place of curiosity for sure.
Yeah. Oh no, that's great. Love that.
Yeah.
And you like to specialize in anxiety.
Yes,
That's kind of your bread and butter.
Fave. Yeah,
okay.
That's my fave. And I work with people with anxiety across the lifespan. So what that means is I have someone that I see as young as 3, and then I have my elderly friends on the other side of the spectrum. Just because I find that when you have such a small specialty, it can get kind of repetitive and redundant. So being on the ground, like doing play therapy is nice, but also don't want to do that all day long. So then I like having sessions with adults and families too, to have, to sit in a chair and get off the ground too. So I specialize in anxiety along the lifespan with all people.
Cool. No, that's great, because you've got like that niche of it's anxiety.
Yeah.
But you still like that variety that kind of keeps it novel still of throughout the lifespan. How anxiety presents.
For sure.
That's really cool.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I think our listeners would be interested to know like how, like what do you do differently with different ages?
Yeah, totally. So I think the number one thing is discovering where they're at developmentally, and I think that's important because I have some 12 or 13 year olds that I'm still like doing play with, and then I have some that do not want to play. Like they want to sit and talk. So I think really the number one difference is in the method. So whether it's play therapy and observing themes, and just I will typically work from a child-centered play therapy, so allowing them to have the freedom and flexibility in noticing where they might be resistant or where they might be hesitant to do something, and trying to create more distress tolerance in session, so then they're able to carry that out with them into the real world. Or with adults, doing more traditional talk therapy. And whenever I'm doing talk therapy, I pull primarily from acceptance and commitment therapy, as well as internal family systems. I do sprinkle in some cognitive behavioral therapy, just because I think tends to be like the gold standard for anxiety. And I think a lot of that is helpful. However, you will not catch me handing out a worksheet. So it's very much like in the moment and like experiential, in the sense that it's not like, okay, let me pull out this workbook and we're going to flip to page 12 and like do this thing together. I find that really just does a disservice, because like people can buy those books themselves. They don't need to come. They don't need to come to me for that.
Yeah, and then it feels like school too.
Yeah.
If like my therapist were to pull out a workbook and be like, okay, we're gonna do page 12 today. I'm like, well, I could do 12 page at home.
Right.
Or page,
yeah.
I can do that.
And it's like, I feel like such a barrier between the relationship to pull out a workbook and like be focused on this workbook, rather than focused on like, well, what's happening here with us, and like what's coming up for me, what's coming up for you, and building upon that. I find having a workbook or a worksheet just eliminates that possibility for like real connection, which we know is so important.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes workbooks and readings and things are helpful for therapists as they begin. And what I would encourage people to do is like become familiar with that curriculum on your own in your own time, so that whenever you're in sessions, you can bring it up naturally and organically without having to like reference this workbook. Or you know, it's something that you can recommend to clients outside of their time with you. I think it's a great supplement, but that's not what I'm doing in sessions. So I always give a little disclaimer whenever I say I do cognitive behavioral therapy, because I'm not the traditional like workbook, worksheet sort of cognitive behavioral therapist.
Yeah. Can you explain acceptance and commitment therapy
and
IFS?
Yes. I love acceptance and commitment therapy. And basically, I love it so much because it kind of gets rid of the toxic positivity that we see sometimes, where someone says something, it's like, oh, but you have to look at the bright side, or like, oh, like that is one of my biggest pet peeves. So one of the core components of acceptance and commitment therapy is like accepting that things suck sometimes, and like, okay, what can we do to maybe make it suck a little bit less, or like how can we live a fulfilling life with these sucky parts too. So that's like my favorite part of it. And I'm really passionate about values and discovering what's most important to people. And so that's a huge component of acceptance and commitment therapy too, is really discovering what's most important to a person. How can they integrate these things into their lives? Because I work with some people who on paper are like wildly successful. So people would assume like, oh, well, they must be so happy. Like they must, have all these things together. But if you look at their day, and let's say that they're one of their number one values is family time, but they wake up at 6 a.m. to go to the gym. They have their kids get on the bus by themselves. They don't see their spouse in the morning because they're doing that. Then they come home and they shower quickly, and then they go off to work, where they stay until 6:30 p.m. And by the time they get home, it's like dinner, and their kids are taking baths and going to bed. They're not going to be happy, because they're missing like their number one value Monday through Friday. And then I'm sure Saturdays and Sundays are filled with other obligations that we have to do to keep life functioning. So sometimes just having that awareness of the values and how little we implement those on a day-to-day basis is like a light bulb moment for people. Because I think a lot of times people feel guilty and shameful for struggling, even when they're successful or doing well. So stepping back and realizing like, yeah, you're doing great in all these areas, and the values that you have are not to be found here. So that's kind of a long-winded summary of acceptance and commitment therapy, and there's a lot more that goes into it, but that's kind of the basis. There is accepting what we can't change and living aligned with our values.
That makes me think of like the basics of self-care, are like identifying your priorities and values and things that give you enjoyment, and making sure you make the time for that thing. So that's what that made me think of.
Absolutely.
It sounded like motivational interviewing to me.
Yeah.
Something that I do.
I definitely think there's some motivational interviewing in there too, to just realize like, okay, here, this is where we're at, what can we do about it, and working through those things.
Cool. And then internal family systems is also one you do. What's that?
So, full disclaimer, I have been dying to get into the internal family systems lottery. And for those of you who don't know, in order to become like certified in internal family systems, there's this lottery system that you have to enter into and cross your fingers that you are one of the lucky ones that can then pay them thousands and thousands of dollars to get certified in this. And I have not been one of those lucky ones, although I'm continuing to try. I'm hearing it's going to get easier because I think they're going to now limit it to therapists, whereas before I think it was kind of open to anyone who had an interest in it.
Okay.
So they got so much attention and weren't able to admit a lot of people. So I feel bad for the people who aren't therapists, but selfishly I'm kind of excited for me because maybe that gives me a little bit of a better chance.
Yeah.
So typically the foundation of internal family systems is that we all have parts within ourselves. And so even earlier, as I was talking about acceptance and commitment therapy, I said, and a part of us feels this way, a part of us feels guilty. And that's really how I utilize internal family systems, is a bit more casually than someone who is like a diehard certified internal family systems person, because you can get deep into like, we have protectors and there's all these different names for different parts of us. Whereas I don't tend to use the names just because to me, it feels like a little too out there. So I will typically just refer to them as being different parts of ourselves, and recognizing like our whole self is made up of all these different parts, and recognizing the function of the parts help us feel not so in disarray or frustrated or angry with those parts. So it's also a lot of self-compassion and like recognizing like a part of me is really excited, another part of me is super freaking nervous, or like this feels right to me and I'm so freaking scared, and like just making room for all of that and recognizing that there's reasons that we feel this way. And then it kind of goes back to acceptance and commitment therapy of like, we'll do it anyways, right? Like feel the feelings and do it anyways. So I think that they pair really nicely together. And although I don't follow it like to a T, I find that language to be super helpful for people.
Yeah, I like that you don't use the like specific labels that come with the parts, because that's something like I've done research into IFS stuff because it's super cool and I want to do it too. But in like the art therapy world, there's some interventions that are like kind of based on the archetypes. Like the Carl Jung archetypes. And instead of giving like a list of the archetypes to the client, we just kind of are like, draw the different parts of yourself when you feel this way, when you feel this way and this way and this way in this situation. And then you look at all those different drawings and you're like, okay, so now let's organize them. And typically after they've been organized, there will be like 3 or 4 main archetypes that pop up in those drawings. And so I feel like with IFS, like the same thing can be done with IFS. Instead of like forcing a label on the client for these different things, you're like, okay, so if you were to give a name to this part, what would you name it? Some people are like Janice or something, but like you know, Janice could be a completely different character from the like protector or something like that.
And I think it helps with people so that they don't get hung up on the anxiety piece of like, oh, it doesn't fit. Like this feeling like doesn't fit into any of these categories. And then what does that mean? Is like, is it wrong? Is it all of the things that people with anxiety like tend to tell themselves? I think whenever we try to like force something into being a label, sometimes it can create a lot of anxiety for people. So it's like, let's just be let's use the ideas and kind of tailor it person to person.
Very person-centered.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Love that.
Yeah.
I have kind of a silly question. What kind of like movie or TV show do you like recommend to clients with anxiety?
Oh my gosh. You know, I don't know if I've ever recommended a TV show or movie. I think if we were to look at any TV show or movie, we can pull out characters with anxiety and maybe think about ways that they either handle it well or don't handle it well. I do a lot of media consultations, and I've recently did one on the Kardashians, which is something that I have to deal with myself, because I'm always like, what if Kim Kardashian is watching this and she's like, Courtney Morgan in Louisville, Kentucky, I am coming for you. Like, because she's much bigger, much more powerful than me. So there's always this like part of me that's like, oh God. But I remember in the article, it was talking about different parenting styles. So how parenting and anxiety, and whether it's the kid struggling with anxiety or the parent struggling with anxiety, how that plays out in families. So I think whether you're watching something like The Kardashians or Shameless or any other TV show, like there's always someone with anxiety or parts of anxiety or some other mental health concern, because it's prevalent. It's everywhere. TV likes to be relatable. So yeah,
that's a really good point. Yeah, because a lot of the clients I see are teens.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, what kind of pop culture stuff are you consuming right now? And we're going to turn that into how we're going to talk about, anxiety or whatever it is they're going through.
Yeah, totally.
So I like that idea.
Yeah. I know. I went to a comedy show for the first time on Friday.
Ooh.
And it was for Trevor Wallace, who's a TikToker.
Okay.
I found him on TikTok way back when like White Claws were the thing. He got really, I felt like he was like the spokesperson for White Claw. And he even like did some skits or like stories, I don't really know what you call it in that world, about anxiety and things, which is so interesting because it's everywhere you look, especially if you're looking for it. And that's another thing. I always feel like if you're looking for something, you'll find it. So regardless of what you're tuning into, if you're looking for someone with anxiety or coping skills or whatever, you'll find it.
Yeah.
Good role models and not good
Right,
role
I was
models.
gonna say, and if you're looking for
Yeah.
ways to make yourself feel more anxious,
Yep.
you will find it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think generally when people are struggling with anxiety, I always say like, let's take it back to the basics, right? Like we can get into all these fun ways of approaching anxiety, like internal family systems or acceptance and commitment therapy or play therapy, but let's take it back to the basics. Like, are you sleeping? Are you nourishing your body? What's your screen time looking like? Because I think if we cannot overcome significant anxiety if those things are out of whack. So I always tune into like basics, and I'll talk to people sometimes like, think about a kid. Like, how do we set kids up for success, right? Like we limit their screen time. We make sure that they have a healthy, nutritious lunch that probably also includes like a little treat or a little dessert, and like, we make sure that they're enrolled in sports and they have time for creativity and all these things. And then we get to be adults and we just stop doing those things. So I always say, take it way back to the basics and think about like, how do we set kids up for success, and how can I do that for myself?
Yeah. No, that's a really good way to get people to think about their own self-care of like, how are you going to treat yourself? Like if you were a little kid, how are you going to set yourself up for your next day of school, or work, whatever you're doing? Yeah. I think that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. I think, we can do all the fun things to help with anxiety, but like really, let's just get back to the basics, kind of go from there.
Yeah.
Well, I found something that led me down a rabbit hole that I thought would be interesting to talk about and relate it to anxiety in general. And it's kind of the anxiety related to societal expectations, and the idea of like, well, these are just things that we have to do, so just do it. And it doesn't matter if you have anxiety because you need to get it done.
Yeah.
So I was watching this video from this creator called Tiffany Ferg, and she was discussing rage bait on the internet. Which
I don't know what that is. What's rage bait?
So rage bait is when people make things intentionally infuriating so that they get engagement. So, like there was this, like a lot of times it's fake. It's made up. But like there was this mom on TikTok that I saw who was saying like, can we normalize paying each other when we have play dates? Because like my friend's kid came over and she had 2 juice boxes and she used the bathroom 3 times, so that's 3 gallons of water that she owes me, and like sent her friend a bill for like this play date and was like, here's all the wear and tear on these items. She broke a toy, so she owes me for that. And it was fake, like it wasn't real, but she got like thousands of comments and engagements because people were mad about it. And so even though they were like comments that were being rude to her and telling her that she was a terrible person for charging her friend for a play date, she got the engagement, which is what she wanted.
That's a little sick and twisted.
Yeah. And like I said, it works super well. Like it's one of the things that people will even like recommend in marketing sometimes. Is like say something super controversial or say something that you know is going to set people off just for the engagement. I couldn't do that.
No, I would feel
want to
so
get
bad.
slandered.
Yeah.
But it
well,
works.
And it's kind of even like what we were talking about last week when we were talking about parenting, or a couple weeks ago, we were talking about parenting TikToks and getting your information from accurate people and how they'll start their TikToks with like, if your kid is a brat, you do this and this and this. Whereas if we were doing something like that, we would be like very gentle about it and not use extreme language like your kid sucks and like, So rage bait is just kind of an extreme way to get engagement, and people will click on your things and they'll comment on it angrily, but you don't care because what you want is the numbers.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
My TikTok is just puppies and kitty cats right now, so I'm missing out on the rage bait stuff.
You're not missing out.
No.
Because it works.
Gosh. Okay.
So anyway, Tiffany Ferg made a video called Let's Discuss Financial Rage Bait and the Morality of Debt. And it was very interesting because she was focusing on this other YouTuber called Caleb Hammer, who does financial audits. Like people will come and see him and they'll bring like all of their financial things and they'll be asking him for help to set up their budget and stuff. But he uses rage bait and what's it called? Clickbait.
Yeah.
So that he can get views. And so his and you know, then he posts clips obviously on TikTok and stuff. So like his thumbnails always say things like this person's stupid, or they're nasty, or they're a man-child, and like the titles are like white girl would rather like eat than grow up, and in the thumbnail it says but I need my venti triple mocha frappe. This one says unhinged newlyweds destined for divorce. Professional victim is pathetic.
Oh my
Pathetic
gosh.
loser is too good for work. Like that's the kind of, that's how he
and I bet it gets eaten up.
Yeah. So
Oh
he's
gosh.
he has 1.38 million subscribers. So he's doing well for himself and like people come and ask for his help. So Tiffany was making a video about how that is not particularly helpful for people who have financial issues and want to get information about how to get out of debt and things like that. And a big part of it was she was focusing, he has like this whole series about this woman who was kind of arguing back with him because she pays for Spotify Premium, which is $10 a month. And he was like, well, can you just like suck it up and not pay for Spotify for a couple years until you get this debt paid off? And she was like, no, I work that into my budget and it's something that I want, and I don't feel like $10 is gonna kill me. And he just spun that to be like, she's such an idiot for wanting this piece of comfort when she should be focusing on eliminating her debt. And it's just not realistic that anybody is going to give up every kind of pleasure until their debt is completely paid off, because that's not how people live. But then watching these things and hearing these things, it gives me anxiety of like, what am I doing wrong? Because when I'm tired, I will go through a drive-through on my way home instead of going home and cooking for an hour. Like, these are just the things that come up. But in addition to the rage bait, it's also just kind of the expectations of, we need to be doing everything a certain way, otherwise we're stupid or we're doing it wrong. And I feel like that would really compound people's anxiety if they already had generalized.
Absolutely.
So I wanted your opinion.
And I think it's so hard because we will always feel like we are the only people struggling, whether that's financially or in our friendships or relationships or in our careers or whatever, I find that people will often feel like they're 10 steps behind everyone else, and it doesn't help whenever we see someone trying to get help from this financial person and they're just like shamed like crazy for it. So I think the biggest thing is recognizing, kind of like you said, that he's doing this for clicks and he's doing this because obviously it works for him. And if someone wanted support, there are much more supportive people to go to rather than this person. But I think if we can zoom out at the bigger picture and recognize that everyone is struggling in some way and we're not alone in that struggle, it makes reaching out for help more realistic and more attainable for people. But I think it adds to a lot of the shame and guilt people feel for not doing things the right way, which is something that people with anxiety really tend to struggle with. And it creates a lot of, I don't know, like decision fatigue or difficulty deciding what to do, or just really creates a lot of like freezing because people are just so overwhelmed that they just decide to do nothing, but then they feel bad because they're doing nothing, and then it's this whole cycle. So I think recognizing that there's many different ways to approach things, and the way one person approaches it might be different than the way that you approach it. I also think it kind of comes back to priorities. So like for someone, they might be like, okay, Spotify Premium, I can give that up. But another person, if they listen to it every single day, it's something that they really value, they don't want to give that up.
Right.
And there's other things I'm imagining that could change that would allow them to not have to give that up, which I think kind of comes back to like the values that we were talking about earlier. Like if someone really values like having music and listening to podcasts and all of these things, like $10 a month, even if you do it for years, is not a significant amount of money if you're in debt. So there's probably other things that you'd be more willing to part with or to change. But someone else might be like, oh my gosh, I never listen to Spotify. I subscribed to that and never deleted it. And like, thanks for pointing that out. I'm getting rid of that right now because I'm definitely guilty of being on reoccurring subscription things. I think although this one person was like, oh my gosh, no, I can't get rid of that, someone else would be like, oh yeah, duh, I can't believe I still have that. Like that was totally an oversight on my end. So recognizing there's not one right way to approach it creates more flexibility, and people are more likely to try then.
Yeah, I just wish that was more of the general worldview, because the way that he frames it, and he has followers, is you're stupid if you pay for things that aren't absolutely necessary. And then you go to the comments and they're all agreeing with him because he's the creator. So it's frustrating, and I think that kind of plays into like why people don't seek out mental health treatment too, is there's still, even though like the newer younger generations are more open to talking about their mental health and getting help when they need it, it's still kind of stigmatized to be like, well, you only go to therapy like if you absolutely cannot function. And it's like, well, not really. But
we don't have to wait for everything to be falling apart to seek therapy.
That something's wrong with you, and that's why you go to therapy. That's what a lot of the like younger kids that I see, when I ask them like, why do you think you're coming to therapy, in the first couple of sessions, just to see what they think about it. And a lot of them are like, 'cause something's wrong with me, and it's like, no, nothing's wrong with you, just like you're struggling, and that's okay. People struggle. Normalizing the struggle, I think, is something we need to do a lot more of, for sure.
And I forgot.
That's okay.
Give me a second. Normalizing the struggle, for sure. And the idea of, I feel like a lot of people with anxiety get frustrated with themselves because it's like, I should just be able to do this, and it shouldn't be this hard. Like, why am I overthinking everything? And then they feel like, well, I can't ask for help because it's my fault, that I can't do it. So how do you how would you respond to somebody that comes to you like that?
Well, I tell them that they're adding a layer of shame and guilt over something that's already bad. So now, instead of just dealing with the emotion that's already bad, like feeling disappointed in yourself or feeling that you're behind, we're just adding this layer. And the first step is like removing that, for the layer that we've added about the shoulds. I should be doing this. I shouldn't be doing this. I know the answer. Why can't I do it? It's so simple. And a lot of times it's true that the answer is simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
So recognizing like, okay, yes, like you're very intelligent and you know logically what the answer is, and implementing that is really, really hard. So creating that space for it to be really, really hard and still continue working through it, I think is the first step. But recognizing that everyone, or a lot of people, tend to add this layer of guilt and shame of like, I shouldn't be like this, I shouldn't feel like this, I have all of this, why do I feel like this?
I think of everything through the lens of neurodiversity, because that's my niche, and I have ADHD, and so like that's my day-to-day life. And so I'm just thinking of like, you know, like society kind of isn't super built to support people who are neurodivergent. And I feel like the same can be said for people who have anxiety. The world is like not set up for you to be successful. And it's not that your anxiety is like, it's not that it's holding you back. It's just like a layer of difficulty that, you know, the rest of the world doesn't seem to bother with or talk about. And that's just kind of what I like. The world's just not really like set up for you to succeed. And so when you're anxious about that, and then, oh, I shoulda, coulda, woulda, that just makes, a whole other complication.
A whole nother layer to it, for sure.
I think of anxiety as a neurodiversity because it can be genetic, like it's not all brought on by trauma necessarily, and it makes
it's in the umbrella
harder for you to function. So like you said, the world's not set up for people with any kind of neurodiversity, even though the more we dig into what neurodiversity is, I bet there's more people than not that have anxiety or ADHD or depression or autism
or all
like,
of them.
All of them. Like, so and then it's frustrating to go online or watch TV or whatever, talk to your friends and feel like you're not doing things the correct way. When we should be able to adapt things so that everybody can function and thrive. It doesn't make sense to me that like you're expected to work 9 to 5 Monday through Friday and then go home and cook and have a clean house and care for children and like it's just, that's not how everybody works, and then they make you feel bad because you don't work that way.
And I would say that's not how most people work. And I think this kind of plays into a reoccurring theme that I often see in sessions is people will think about, oh, like when I get there, when I have the clean house, when I have like the job that I love, like when everything aligns for me, like that is when I'll be happy. Like that is when I'll be satisfied. And it's like, there doesn't exist. Which is a really hard thing for people to come to terms with if we always are like delaying being happy, delaying feeling successful, delaying all of these things until things are perfect for us. We will never feel those feelings. We will never like allow ourselves to tune in to those because we're always thinking, well, I'm not there yet. It's like, well, all we really have is now and like what we choose to do with it, and releasing the idea of like there.
Because then you're missing out on the happy experiences that you could be having right now, like the glimmers and things like that. You're missing out because you're like, I can't be happy or I won't be happy until this happens. So like this mysterious thing that doesn't exist and between there now and that thing, you're just not gonna be happy. Like that's you're missing out on so much.
And we'll talk to some people who are at the there.
And
they're like, dude, what?
Why am I not happy?
Why am I not happy? Why does life feel purposeless? Why does this suck? And it's like, because we idolize like this there that we perceive everyone else to have that we don't have, and we think, oh well, when we get there, and then we get there and we're like, dude, what? I still feel the same way I was feeling whenever I wasn't here.
Do you think some people like misinterpret what happiness means to themselves? Do you think they like they're maybe putting it, happiness on like an outward experience rather than like an actual emotion?
I think so. I think if we place happiness on outside things, it feels more attainable, which is really fulfilling for people if like they think like, okay, if they're able to convince themselves like when I get there, because that's something to work towards, that's like some hope, that's all these things that are really, really wonderful. It's just unfortunate that it's placed on this thing that may or may not ever happen for us, and even if it does, we might not feel any better when it happens.
Right.
So I definitely think that is a part of it. And I think the only way to get out of this cycle is to start trying to find little moments of happiness or peace in the day-to-day, which I think really comes from mindfulness.
Yeah.
And slowing down.
I think too, like a lot of people, like if you try to ask them like to find like what's something happy that happened to you today, they like can't think of anything. But if you use other words like what was a peaceful moment you had, what was like something nice that happened, or what was something that made you laugh, that's like all of the definitions of happiness without having to be like, when did you feel happy today? Because then you're like, my brain went out the window. I don't know.
Yeah. And recognizing like no one is in a constant state of happiness. No.
It would be weird if we were.
It would be so weird if we were. Like typically we're kind of in this neutral phase. And we have like little peaks, little valleys, like all throughout the day. But releasing the idea that we will ever be 100% of the time like so thrilled and just bursting with excitement, because it's not reality.
It'd be exhausting.
It would be exhausting. Absolutely exhausting.
Yeah.
I think like you said, like anxiety is always moving the goalpost, because it feels like it should be this external thing that when this happens I won't be anxious anymore, but that's not what anxiety is.
No.
So even when you get there, you're gonna have to figure out what to do, because your anxiety is gonna be like, oh well, now we need this. Yeah. We got the house, now we need
Right. Yeah. Like setting goals is like fine, and that's a good thing to set goals, but to hang your happiness or your contentment on a goal is just not realistic. It's just makes it really hard to reach that goal too.
Having societal expectations and pressures put on you constantly is just not helping you enjoy the moment, because we're not allowed to have, like, I was thinking about this in terms of like adult friendships and things. Like, we're not encouraged to like have hobbies as adults like we are when we're in high school. And even when we're in high school, we're like, you have hobbies so that you can get into college or so that you can get ahead in some way. It's not so that you can enjoy something. It's to be better at something. And then that kind of goes away when you're an adult and you're like just have to focus on responsibilities all the time, and that is not healthy for your anxiety.
No. And I'm glad that you mentioned hobbies, because as I was talking about earlier with like the basics of like making sure you're eating healthy and sleeping and moving your body, it's like the next thing that I would add would be a hobby. Like a hobby that does not bring you money, a hobby that is not working towards any sort of goal. I mean, and of course, like within a hobby, sometimes you have goals like I'm going to finish this art craft, or I'm going to get better at tennis, or whatever it is. But it's not like that is your sole purpose of doing it. Like you're doing it because you enjoy it. It's like a break from the day-to-day responsibilities that we have. That would be the next, like, once we have the basic necessities down, we would add in hobbies.
So it's hierarchy of needs.
Going
exactly. I went through a period of time where like I called art my hobby, but it was also I was trying to make money. And so I was trying to make it my job and my hobby at the same time, and because everyone's like, oh, if you love what you do, then you'll be happy. And I'm like, I love making art. I hate everything about making it a job. So, but I'm making art, and if that's what makes me happy, and if you're doing what you love and you're happy in your job, like, why is it not clicking together?
And
it's because it needed to not have a goal. It needed to just be for the sake of making something, to be creative. So I think that's important to think about, in like, what are your hobbies and and what are you getting out of them?
Because that's another thing people expect people to do. It's like, oh, you can't just make something and then just have it. You have to sell it. You have to have a business. You have to do
you know
something.
How many 3-foot by 5-foot paintings that I have that just like sit? No one wants to buy them. And I don't want to sell them, and they're just there. But like, the process of making them was what I needed, and I can just paint over them if I need to do it again. I don't need to do anything with it. It's just there.
And if you like it, that's what matters.
If you enjoyed creating it, if you enjoyed the process, well, then it was a success. It was what it was meant to be.
Yeah, and it makes me think too, like, of high school. Like, I love dancing, but I like did the dance team thing for a hot second and was like, nope, I'm out. This is not what I want to do. But I still continued. Like, dancing was like my thing, my like self-care for so long. But I was not going to compete. I was not going to do it on a team. It was most of the time just me going somewhere and dancing, just like because that's what I like to do.
Right.
But I think a lot of people are hung up on the like, I got to get something tangible out of this or something. So I need to gain something out of this.
Yeah.
Other than just feeling good.
Yeah. Yeah. I did piano lessons when I was growing up. And then when I graduated high school, my mom was disappointed that I didn't do like a music minor or something. And I was like, no, that was just something I did. Like, I don't have to do it professionally. I just liked doing it.
Right. Yeah. Right.
I actually found a Reddit post similar to what you were just talking about.
Okay.
Ooh.
It's about the parenting influencer stuff, but it's kind of about that, what we were talking about with the not rage quitting.
Rage bait.
Rage bait.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is a post, a warning about parenting influencers. I gotta turn this around because I can't read small print. Hi all, I wanted to share something I've noticed recently while following a well-known parenting influencer, and I think it's worth being aware of when turning to parenting influencer accounts for parenting advice. I've been following her for a while now, and I always thought her advice and approach were interesting, even if not entirely my way or style. But recently, I noticed something that unsettled me. She did a post on how she never ever made a single move to influence her teen daughter's behavior in any way, which turned controversial because a lot of people shared very vulnerable stories in the comments about how a hands-off, no intervention, no judgment approach can lead to teens being put into danger, missing out on advice. None of the comments were disrespectful or personal attacks. They were just, hey, this is cool, but what about personal thing that happened? Those comments were hugely upvoted, with lots of other commenters chiming in with their own stories of being inadvertently hurt by parents who refused to step in or protect them when they needed it. Some commenters explained why this influencer's methods don't work for them because of their ethnic, racial, class background, etc. And then bam, all of a sudden, all the comments just vanished overnight. That's when I realized that any comment questioning her approach or offering a different perspective was immediately deleted. All of her comment sections are now eerily positive, with everyone just agreeing with her. It feels incredibly manipulative and curated, like an echo chamber, where only her narrative can exist. I guess I know in theory that parenting influencers often delete any kind of off-brand comment, so I know it's not surprising. But there was something about reading these incredibly vulnerable comments about parents' most intimate experiences and then seeing them just erased, that I realized how controlling these parent advice brands are. Depending on which account you're seeking tips from, parents who are genuinely looking for guidance or support might only see glowing, one-sided feedback that paints the ideology as flawless, which is just misleading. No one ever gets to see the full picture, the struggles or the downsides that other parents might have faced. Instead of a balanced conversation where people can exchange real experiences, good and bad, the comment sections are just a perfectly crafted sales pitch. I've seen it with a lot of different TikTok accounts where they just delete all the negative comments, which, like, I get, you don't want negative stuff on your profile, but at the same time, like, some of the negative stuff is just someone like, I had a different experience. Mm-hmm. They're not being mean. They're just saying they had a different experience, and then they just get deleted and not acknowledged, and there's no balance. Mm-hmm. I think that's, misleading, misinformation, I feel like, too. Yeah. But yeah, with a lot of the parenting TikTok accounts and Instagram accounts I've seen, that seems to be what a lot of people do. They just delete the stuff they don't want on their comment section.
Yeah. You can also like turn off commenting altogether. Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
If you have a particularly bad video, you can say I'm not open to feedback, actually.
Yeah. I think, that's a little more like clear what's going on, but the like going through and purposefully deleting very specific comments is like intentional in a whole other way that's like skeevy.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Yeah. Gosh, I hope I never become too big to the point of like people being like saying mean things and then having to think about, okay, which ones do you delete, which ones do you keep, like which ones are constructive, which ones are unhelpful. That's just a lot.
Yeah. It is a lot to think about. Like, what if someone comments on a video I make and it's something that not that I did wrong, but they just like have a different opinion, and then I'm like, okay, like now what do I do?
Yeah. And I think that is an opportunity. Like, I would imagine the way that you would handle that was just saying like, thanks so much for sharing. Like, I love hearing others' opinions. But then if it's something that's outwardly aggressive, I feel like you just delete that one.
That would be, I would delete something that was like aggressive for sure.
Yeah. It's tricky. And I also think it's hard because parents are looking for sound advice and looking for guidance. And we have to be mindful not to have these idols that are real people that are making their own mistakes, or that are just so diehard on their approach or their method that they're willing to ignore the other side of things just to really sell what they're trying to sell. I think it's a tricky spot. And like, even with the parenting curriculums that I use, I'm trained in a variety of parenting curriculums, and like there's bits and pieces of them that I like, but I find I like parts of different ones more than one, like in its entirety. So kind of taking what works for you and then leaving the rest can be really helpful. So I think recognizing that someone might have good guidance sometimes, and then there might be some things that just don't land right with us and we disagree with, which if we choose to share that, totally fine. And also, unfortunately, they might delete it or they might not acknowledge it. So I think recognizing, or trying to recognize, like, what's our goal in sharing this? Is it to allow other people to see like you're not alone if this thing didn't work for you? Are we hoping for a reaction? Are we hoping for a response? If we can get clearer about like why we're doing it, then maybe it will guide us on like if we should do it, if it's the most helpful. But it's true. I see like all sides of it. I see parents trying to get support and guidance and then feeling like, how could they say this? Like, this doesn't align with all these other things or whatever. And then also being the person like, gosh, like I'm doing my best. And now people aren't liking what I'm saying. And then what does that mean? And then like spiraling through that too. Like I see all sides of it.
Yeah. It's everything on social media is just complicated.
And curated. Like if we can remember, like Instagram is not real. TikTok is not real. Like people are showing what they choose to show. Like I know even for me, like I talked about earlier, I do a lot of media consults and people are always like, oh my gosh, like congratulations. Like that's wonderful that you're in this or you're in that. But if you only knew how many people I spoke to that did not use what I said, you'd be like, okay, like maybe it's because it didn't fit their narrative. It didn't fit what they wanted. I didn't give them what they were looking for. So I know one that I recently did that I was very disappointed to not get, which is about Love Island. I don't know if you guys watch Love Island.
I know what it is.
People have mixed opinions on reality TV shows, but it's like one of the ways that I decompress. I'm like, I talk about heavy stuff all day long. If I want to watch some hot singles walk around this villa on my off time, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So someone put out looking for therapists who work with relationships, which I'll admit, I work with families and I work with like parents, but I'm not a relationship expert. So what the narrative I'm telling myself is that's why I wasn't chosen, which may or may not be true. But they were asking about like, which couples do you expect to stay together? How can couples like transition from being on reality TV to like being in the real world? Like all these sorts of things that I felt like I gave sound guidance on. And the article went live today and I was not in it. So for every single time that I post like, oh, I'm in time, or oh, I'm in this, or oh, I'm in that, it's like there's so many that I went for and I did not get. So recognizing like someone might look a certain way, but we don't know everything that goes on that doesn't work out behind the scenes.
Do you, because you're very active on social media and you have all those media opportunities and things. Do you ever experience a lot of alternative opinions?
Sometimes. And there's definitely been some that I've, like, even as I'm like writing my responses or talking on the phone, I'm like, I could see this going bad. Like I can see it. And it's often whenever I'm talking about a viral TikTok about like parenting, there was one where it was like a mom was letting her kid draw on the cabinets or something. That was one of the first ones I did for HuffPost. And I knew like this is going to be a controversial one. And initially I looked at the comments and there were some people disagreeing. Luckily, no one really like came for me in the comments. It was mostly people coming for the TikToker, but it definitely happens. I don't look at the comments because it's a tricky thing. Like, you'll give your responses to a person, and whether it's talking on the phone or emailing them, and then sometimes it takes months and months and months for the articles to go live. I knew to look out for the Love Island one today because the reunion is tonight and I'm so excited for it. So I knew, I'm like, well, they're going to put out the article before the reunion. I knew to like look for that, but half of the time, like months and months and months go by before they're ever published. So it's a lot to like keep on top of, to see like, do they use me? And if they use me, I'll read the article. And then sometimes like there's comments, sometimes there's not, but I don't really go out of my way to look for them. Yeah. And then as far as my own like Instagram page, I haven't gotten to the point where I get negative comments that I can at least like remember off the top of my head. So I haven't experienced that yet. I know it will happen. The same thing, like just on all of these things, like reviews. I know that one day we'll get a bad review and I'll have to deal with that. Or I'll get a negative comment on Instagram, or something bad will happen, and that will be a tricky thing to navigate. But also, like, that's people's experiences. And if they have a bad experience, or if they don't agree with something that I say, that's totally okay too. But also, I can protect my peace by not seeking out that information.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah. So there's definitely been some where I'm like, oh, this could be tricky, or this could be an interesting one, but I haven't gotten like a significant amount of backlash for anything that I've done so far. I'm sure it's bound to happen.
I mean,
it's bound to happen. Like, the more things that you do, eventually, like, your odds of getting some negative feedback go up.
Yeah. Yeah. But most of your Instagram is about like, come to therapy.
And,
get some help.
It's
not super controversial.
It's not
controversial.
super. There's not super controversial. I did one talking about like the barriers that people experience when coming to therapy. In that one, I got a couple of comments on that could be seen maybe negatively, or maybe in disagreement, or maybe like self-promoting. I'm not sure. But that was one. That's the only one I can really think of where I got feedback that could be construed a certain way. But also, like I said, I'm protecting my peace by not looking into it too deeply. I could like the comment, reply, and move on.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else that you'd like to share with our audience besides follow her and go see her?
Yeah, you can absolutely follow me, and you can come see all my friends on my team. The absolute best. I just adore all of them so much. I don't think so. I think you guys did a really wonderful job about touching on it was bound to happen, touching on all these different areas. So I think I'm good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions for us?
Oh my gosh, I'm just so curious and interested to see who else joins the podcast.
Oh yeah.
Some good people.
Yeah, I'm
up.
excited.
Very
I've seen just like the comments and people talking, and I'm like, they're gonna have some good people on this. I'm excited to see
a lot of really different people, which I'm excited
for.
for.
a good variety. Yeah. Well, yay.
Yeah. Well, we're so glad that you were our first guest.
Yes.
For bearing with us as we went through all of the figuring out how to do this. Yes, please follow Counseling Unconditionally on Instagram, or check out her website. It'll all be in our show notes. Comments about your experience about anxiety, or societal pressures, or whatever you want. Comments are comments. And follow us, subscribe, tell your friends, share with everybody.
Rate, review, subscribe.
Be really excited that we have guests.
Yeah.
And
Yay.
Anything else?
I don't think so. I think we're good.
Yay.
Okay. Have a great week.
Yay.
Goodbye.
Bye.